This video tutorial will cover the addition of new freezers to your storage module in webLDMS. Now there are two ways to create a new freezer. One is to build your freezer dynamically using the Action drop-down menu. The other is to build a freezer template. And this template can then be reapplied and is useful if you have multiple freezers of the exact same layout and capacity. Let's go through method 1 and use the Action drop-down menu. From the Action drop-down menu, select Add Storage Unit. In the Create Storage Unit menu, your first option is to load a template. If you have previously built a template, you could select it here. To build one dynamically, start in the next field under Name. This is the display name that will show up in the Stored Samples page. Below that, the type of storage unit. We have freezer, refrigerator, or room temperature cabinet. The temperature. This should be the temperature that the freezer is set at. Next, we create our dimensions. So first are the number of rows. So think of the number of rows as the number of compartments in our freezer. Let's build a -80 upright freezer with 4 shelves. So number of rows will be 4. Next will be number of columns. So think of the freezer unit itself as one large column, and we'll set that to 1. Once we've set our dimensions, we see a 2D representation appear in the preview window, and it looks like a rudimentary freezer with shelves 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to go ahead and leave positions only checked. I will leave the fill order as left to right, top to bottom. There are no further columns, as we see here in the preview window, so left to right does not apply. Top to bottom is how these shelves will be labeled, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Click Save, and we see our training freezer entry on the Stored Samples page. Notice there's no plus sign over to the left, so we now need to add our shelves. Over to the right in the Edit drop-down menu, select Add New Level. The name, I'll simply call this Shelf 1. Number of rows. So just as we envision the freezer as one large column, each individual shelf is one row. For number of columns, think of this as the number of racks that will sit on this shelf. I'm going to continue to use positions only and my fill order of left to right, top to bottom. Since this is an individual row, only left to right is applicable. And I will click Continue. I'm going to place shelf 1 here in the first position of my freezer and click Save. I'm going to continue with the remaining shelves. Clicking the Edit drop-down menu, selecting Add New Level. Now for my last shelf, I want to demonstrate how you can create a shelf that will contain boxes only. No racks. This is useful for our smaller labs that do not have freezers with racks, that are only storing maybe 6 boxes at a time, and they're going right onto the freezer shelf. So I'm continuing to add a new level. And I want to let the shelf hold 25 boxes. Okay. So for number of rows and columns, what we are going to do is roughly match the number of boxes that can fit across a shelf and the number of boxes that can fit on top of those. So in my example, my shelf can hold 5 boxes at the bottom of the shelf. And there's enough space in the shelf to stack the boxes 5 boxes high. Now what we want to do is we need to flip the positions, because our first box is actually going to go at the bottom to the left, and we're going to fill from left to right. So we're filling left to right, bottom to top. So we're going to make our first layer of boxes, and then once that's filled, we can then put boxes on top of that. And if we get over 10 boxes, we can create a third level of boxes on top of those. But at the very bottom here is the base of the shelf. And I will click Continue. And of course, if you're using racks, you want to mimic the setup for the other 3 shelves that you saw me demonstrate. Now that our shelves are in place, I'd like to show how to add a rack onto the shelf. Now we made 5 positions available per shelves for our rack. So let's drop down and select Add New Level. I'm going to call this Training Rack 1. Number of rows is 4. Number of columns is 5. So this can hold 20 boxes. I'm going to label my rack with alphabetic rows and numeric columns. Now, how your rack is filled depends upon how it's constructed. If you have fixed spaces in your rack, they're not movable, you will fill the back column of the rack first, and then move forward to the next column, and then the next. That will leave the stored samples in the back of the freezer as you're accessing the empty spaces to the front to add new boxes. You're not bringing that entire rack out into the ambient air. That fill order is top to bottom, right to left. So it's going to fill from the top at A5 to D5, and then it will fill from column 5 over to column 1. If you have racks that have trays in them, so the rack stays in place but you can pull out the trays, you would be filling from the back of the tray at A5 all the way to A1 before you proceeded to tray B. Then you'd fill from the back at B5 all the way forward to B1. That fill order is right to left, top to bottom, meaning that it fills from A5 to A1, B5 to B1, C5 to C1, and then the bottom tray from back to front. Now, all of these racks that we have at our laboratory are the same, or we have many of them. So instead of doing this every time, I'm going to save a new template and give it a name. So I'm going to name it 4x5 stainless steel drawer racks. And then click Continue. So I do have this warning, since it is filling from A5 to A1, that it does not match the coordinates in the labeling. That is fine. I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to place this rack into position 1. Now I see my training freezer, my shelf 1, and my training rack 1. Now to add more racks, simply use the drop-down menu, click Add New Level, and from the template menu, we can now choose our template that we've built and simply give it a name. Scroll down, click Continue, click OK through the confirmation, and place that in position on the shelf. Now to add containers to your rack, use the drop-down menu and choose Add New Container. For the shelf that we've built that holds 25 boxes, in the drop-down menu, instead of adding a new level such as a rack, you simply drop down one level more and click Add New Container, and then you can place containers directly onto that shelf. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If you have any questions, please contact our 24/7 user support department. The contact us information is on our webpage at ldms.org.